Very excited. We got an awesome fight weekend ahead. UFC 310. And this guy is one of the best to talk fighting with in the business. Anthony Lionheart Smith joining us here. He's taking on Dominick Reyes this weekend. Very fired up for it. Anthony, thanks for the time again, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, no worries, man. Thanks for having me.
You were recently down here. You were recently in Miami visiting studios and doing a little bit of broadcasting. How did you enjoy our city?
It was cool, man. I was actually down there training with Dean Thomas. And so we have our radio show at SiriusXM. So we just took advantage and used the SiriusXM studios while we were down there. And Dean and I had a good time.
Is there something about how have you gotten down here often? Is this did you is there a certain thing about the city you liked particularly?
I worked the pay-per-view where O'Malley won the belt off of who did he take the belt from? Or no, he defended. He
Defended
defended
against
Cheeto.
Cheeto.
Cheeto. So I was there for that and had a good time. And then, but Dean Thomas lives in that area, so kind of just following him around. But I do like Miami, man. It's a cool city.
Yeah, I was blown away in that building how many people from Ecuador came to see Cheeto because I thought that was kind of going to be like the Sean O'Malley show, and I feel like he walked into a road game and he wasn't like he was. I found it surprising. I know how like Latin our city is, but Cheeto had said he goes, "Well, I already get a hero's welcome, even not being champ," and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of a cool thing." I was not prepared for how many people were there to see that man in that building.
Yeah, it was crazy, and it was really cool to see how many people were there for Dustin Poirier.
Yeah.
Kind of like that was one of the wildest crowds that I've seen in a long time.
So this upcoming fight against Dominick Reyes, I mean, you guys have been at the top of this division for a very, very long time. This is, feels like it's impossible to be a boring fight. What are the things about him that you've been, I guess, most in tune with as you're getting ready for this one?
I just am like even though he's had some adversity and stuff, I've always been a fan of his style. Like no matter what happens, Dominick Reyes is in exciting fights. Um, we've never really had too many personal interactions, a couple here and there, but um, he's just an incredible athlete, man. He's really explosive, crazy fast, really accurate. Um, and like he's got to get some credit for his mentality. Like no matter what that dude is a dog, and sometimes his durability has um, I don't know, has betrayed him at times. It hasn't steered him away from still stepping into the fire every time he fights. And you got to appreciate that about the guy that he's willing to fight for sure. And I like that.
I'm just interested on your perspective on this because we've been talking a lot this week. There's been a lot of talk from the Dolphins fallout their loss on Thanksgiving because it said like a warm weather team can't go to the cold and like play as tough, which I think is a little bit nutty because football players are amongst the toughest athletes. Nobody's as tough as fighters. But for somebody like you, I mean, we've seen you walk through literal like broken teeth, all types of things in a fight. Do you find like are there little things that could mess with you in fighting that just can throw you off your game, or do you think like as many years as you have in a cage, nothing could like really mentally shake you in a fight? Because I find it strange that like for the Dolphins, a cold weather thing, and even their opponents were saying it could mess with them that much. But I don't know because I'm not that level of crazy and tough like you guys are.
At this point, no, there's not too many things that are gonna throw me off. I think my biggest challenge has always been my focus. Like sometimes I get bored. Like when I'm in there and it's not super exciting, or I don't have a guy that really wants to step into the fire and really go. Sometimes I do find myself getting distracted and forcing the action when I shouldn't. I think that's always been my biggest, at least in the last 10 years, been my biggest problem is just staying focused in there and not just kind of letting the lack of action bore me. Because then I start looking around in the crowd and seeing like, oh, there's Tom Brady, like I just start getting bored. Because I need like a healthy dose of danger. Dominick Reyes is one of those guys you can't like. He'll have my full attention.
Do you remember like at what point in your career it got to that point where you become such a vet that like you're like, oh no, this is not I don't have the juice here like I probably should.
Um, no, it had happened times before, and I just had to kind of recheck myself and get through it. But it happened a little bit in the Jones fight where I was just frustrated and bored, like just wasn't going the way that I wanted it to. Not just because of like wasn't winning, but because it wasn't like it didn't feel like a real fight. I felt like we were in this weird funky ass competition and it wasn't fun. Um, that's like one that stands out for sure.
Like, what did you make of his return pretty recently against Stipe? What did you think of his performance off the injury?
I thought he looked good. I thought he looked smaller, which made him more impressive than he was in the Cyril Gahn fight. He moved really well. Um, I think Stipe had a good, had a good showing of himself. This guy's in his 40s. He's been through the ringer. He's been doing this for a really long time. I thought that he made John work for it.
Do you buy into the idea, like the whole ducking thing? Like people were doing that with John because of the Aspinall thing, which obviously, if I as a fan, I'm greedy, I want to see it, but I also understand, like as a guy who I guess builds the legacy as much, you want to be rewarded for it, or do you feel like as a guy at the top of the sport, it is kind of, is there like a fight responsibility to like hold the guard and pass it off to the new? Like, what do you make of all the John Aspinall stuff?
Damn, man, now you're gonna have me sitting here defending Jon Jones, and I hate that. But no, man, I kind of feel for John a little bit. Like he doesn't like like you said what you say at the end. Like some like the big name guys have a responsibility to like. I don't think John owes anybody anything. Like I think he's deserved the right that if he wants to retire, then go retire. And I'll tell you this: Jon Jones is not afraid of anybody. What he is very petty. And if you attach yourself to John, or you attack John, or you come at him in a certain way that he doesn't like, he's petty, and he's not going to give you what you want, and he's going to make it really difficult for you. And I know that Aspinall feels like I'll just keep poking and poking and poking and poking. Jon Jones is not the guy you want to poke. He's really not. He'll make your life real, real difficult, and that's not in the octagon. It's outside of it. He can make your life very difficult, and he thrives in that and really loves it and doesn't care that you know it. So um, I think Aspinall would have had a better opportunity if he would have stayed very quiet and let the people kind of dictate what they want to see and not really come at John like that. Because what John is more than petty is he's prideful, and he has a healthy ego. And if the world thinks that guy's going to beat you, then John will go handle that. But if it's just you being an asshole, John's is going to make it difficult for you.
You're taking on a guy, you both have had the common opponent with Dom coming up. Do you find yourself like, are you worried, and do you have to prepare for a guy that took Jon Jones to the brink? A lot of people thought that he even beat Jon Jones. Like, when you're preparing for this, do you look at the most recent version of him, or do you feel like what the guy is at the peak of his powers, or do you not know that until a fight night?
No, man, it's only fair that if we're going to look at the Jon Jones fight and say, well, he got really close, and I think he beat Jon Jones. He also got starched by Ryan Spann. So I mean, it's not fair to just look at the positives. You got to look at them both. I think that that's the same guy, though. I had long said that when John ran into someone that matched his physicality and his athleticism, like they matched his size and his athleticism, and he was going to have a tough time. Like insert Dominick Reyes. Like John he struggled with Alexander Gustafsson in the same way. It's a guy that matched him physically, and was close enough to push him athletically. I think Reyes had a fantastic game plan. I think sometimes styles make fights, and that style really worked out for Reyes. For being honest, I think when John fought maybe me, Thiago Santos, and Dom, I think maybe he was a bit distracted and a bit uninterested at that point in his career. So I don't know. I think Dominick's the same guy. He like technically he is what he is. Like he's like what we've seen of him in the last however many years is what he is. Now is he going to make smarter decisions and game plan better and decide to walk down those roads in different ways? Then I think it comes down to a mental thing in his approach. But technically, in what he is physically as an athlete, that's just what he is.
I want to get your thoughts on this just because you're one of my favorite analysts when you work the desk. You always have like just great background stuff on like what you always hear stuff in the camps. Like the stuff you bring to the fans is different from everybody else. So I always appreciate that with you.
Thank you.
With Shavkat versus Ian Garry, with them spending times in camps or having that knowledge, I know this happens in the sport, but like how much is that a benefit or a tell when guys are getting ready for the real deal and they are going to end up fighting?
Um, yeah, I think that them training together is a is a big deal. I think that matters. I think we can go back to a couple different scenarios of guys that have trained together or spent time together or around each other. You can kind of see in their interactions who is the alpha between those two. So we go back to like Gilbert Burns and Kamaru Usman, like both very, very confident, both very sure of their abilities to win. But you could tell in the first 30 seconds of that fight who won most of those rounds when they trained. Like you could tell in their interactions per which one of those guys was the alpha. And I think that it's very similar with Shavkat and Ian Garry. You can tell in their mannerisms seeing them walk around. Like just as a fighter myself, I'm not going to put it out there because it's not fair for me to talk about those guys behind the scenes when they're not in front of cameras and things that the public's allowed to that they're allowed to take in. But I can tell you which one of those guys probably won those rounds by seeing how they act and like what their interactions are. And both of them know who's probably going to win the fight. Like they probably between the two of them, like whoever was losing most of those rounds probably is thinking like, I know that I have the abilities. It's been a long time since we've trained. It's been a couple of years. I've gotten a lot better. I could do this, this, and this. But like deep down, they both know who's likely to win this fight. It's kind of like Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. Like everyone thought that Errol Spence was the guy. But I've seen those two interact with each other behind the scenes. It was very clear that Terrence Crawford was the alpha and Errol Spence wasn't. But in front of the cameras and stuff and with people, everyone else was hard to tell and Terrence looked quiet. But like everybody that seen anything behind the scenes knew exactly how that fight was going to go.
God, I was in the building for that. That was one of the coolest performances I've ever seen.
Right.
Just
And like did
master
Terrence
the
look
peak.
shocked?
No, he didn't. He
And
just
did Errol Spence look shocked?
no.
Like he wasn't. He kind of knew like there was the likelihood of that happening was pretty good.
Hey man, I always appreciate your time, Anthony. Thanks so much. Best of luck against Dominick Reyes. Always love watching the cage and your broadcasting. One of my favorite guests to talk to, man. So thank you.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
All right, take care.